Now we are going to discuss the management of inflammatory bowel disease. First, see the list of drugs which are used in the management of inflammatory bowel disease. So first we are going to start with 5-amino-salicylic acid agents. So 5 ASA agents or 5-amino-salicylic acid agents. So you must be knowing that these agents are the mainstay of treatment in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. So 5 ASA agents, these are mainstay of therapy in both Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Okay, now see what is the mechanism of action of 5-amino-salicylic acid agents. What's the mechanism of action? So these agents leads to inhibition of NF-κB activation and prostaglandin synthesis. Inhibition of NF-κB activation and prostaglandin synthesis. Second, they are helpful in scavenging of free radicals. So this is the mechanism of action. Now see, first you should understand what is the location of inflammatory bowel disease, means the site of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. First see, so we discussed that in Crohn's disease, what is the most common site? It is ileum. There is involvement of ileocecal region and cecum. Clear? And what about in ulcerative colitis? In ulcerative colitis, there is involvement of rectum and then there is involvement of colon. There is retrograde involvement. Now, what is the problem with 5 ASA agents? That up to 80% of unformulated aqueous 5 ASA agent are absorbed in the proximal part of small intestine. So the problem, up to 80% of unformulated aqueous 5 ASA agents are absorbed in the proximal part of small intestine. So what is the problem? It is not going to reach the distal part of small intestine and colon where the disease is situated. So to increase its delivery to the distal part of small intestine and in the colon, we are going to attach 5 ASA agents with carriers. Clear? So what's the problem with these agents? The problem is up to 80% of unformulated aqueous 5 ASA agent is absorbed in proximal part of small intestine. Clear? That's why we are going to attach it with carrier. One of the carrier which is used with 5-amino-salicylic acid agent is sulfapyridine, and the name of this drug is sulfasalazine. Okay, so see what are the components of sulfasalazine. Okay, so there are two components. It is composed of 5-amino-salicylic acid agents plus sulfapyridine. This is sulfapyridine. Okay, so you know that for anti-inflammatory effect, which agent is responsible? It is 5-ASA. So it is responsible for the anti-inflammatory effect. Okay, and which one is the carrier? Sulfapyridine. This is the carrier. Clear? Sulfapyridine is the carrier. Now see, this sulfapyridine is a carrier and it is linked with 5-amino-salicylic acid by azo bond. So by which bond it is linked? It is azo bond. What is the action? That it is going to deliver 5-ASA moiety to the colon. So it is going to deliver this 5-ASA moiety to the colon. But what is the problem? Most of the side effects of sulfasalazine are because of this carrier. Which one? Sulfapyridine. There is another agent known as oxalazine. This is oxalazine. And what's the component of oxalazine? Here, there are two moieties of amino-salicylic acid. So it is composed of 5-ASA plus 5-ASA. And the third agent which is used, it is balsalazide. So the third agent is balsalazide. Clear? And in balsalazide, apart from 5-amino-salicylic acid, we use 4-amino-benzoyl beta-alanine. So what we use? 4-amino benzoyl beta alanine. Clear? So we use 4-amino benzoyl beta alanine, right? So here this is the agent which is carrier. So 5-amino salicylic acid agent or 5-ASA is responsible for anti-inflammatory effect. 4-amino benzoyl beta alanine is the carrier, and here also it is linked with 5-ASA by azo bond. So these are the 5-ASA agents which are used. Second group of drugs is antibiotics. So which antibiotics we use? You have seen in surgery emergency that generally in surgery emergency we use two antibiotics, Cipro-Metro, ciprofloxacin and metronidazole. If we see the role of antibiotics, generally these antibiotics are used in Crohn's disease. There is no role of these antibiotics in active or quiescent ulcerative colitis. Okay, so see which antibiotics we are going to use. So we use ciprofloxacin, and we use metronidazole. Clear? We discussed that these antibiotics are used in Crohn's disease. These are used in Crohn's disease. There is no role in active or quiescent ulcerative colitis. So important point that there is no role in active or quiescent ulcerative colitis. Okay. Second important point, that in which patients of Crohn's disease we are using these antibiotics. So we are using these antibiotics in Crohn's disease patient who have active inflammatory Crohn's disease, fistulous or perianal Crohn's disease. So in which group we are using? The patients of Crohn's disease who are having active inflammatory disease, or there is fistulous Crohn's disease, or there is perianal Crohn's. Okay. Second question, in which particular group of ulcerative colitis we are going to use the antibiotics? So we discussed that in ulcerative colitis surgery is curative. Okay, surgery is curative in ulcerative colitis and it's palliative in Crohn's disease. So what surgery can be done? We can go for total proctocolectomy and we can go for ileal pouch anal anastomosis. So whenever we create a pouch of ileum, in pouch there is inflammation and that inflammation is known as pouchitis. So if a patient of ulcerative colitis is going to develop pouchitis after total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis, so in this particular group these antibiotics are used. So what's the role of antibiotics? Mainly used in Crohn's, the patients having active inflammatory disease, fistulous or perianal Crohn's, and in patients of ulcerative colitis it is used in the patients who are going to develop pouchitis. Now see what is the role of glucocorticoids. So glucocorticoids are used in inducing remission in both Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. There is no role of glucocorticoids in maintenance therapy. Important point. So what's the important point related to glucocorticoids? That these are used for inducing remission. For both Crohn's disease as well as ulcerative colitis. There is no role in maintenance therapy. Clear? So whenever there is flare up, we are using glucocorticoids for remission. Now what are the agents which are used? The agents we are using, so we use prednisone. We use parenteral agents like hydrocortisone, methylprednisolone. So parenteral agents. And what are the parenteral agents we are using? Hydrocortisone and methylprednisolone. Okay, and there is another agent which is used commonly, and that is budesonide. budesonide. Okay, so see what are the important points related to budesonide. Budesonide is released entirely in the colon. And there is second advantage, that there is minimal or no steroid related side effects. So it is released entirely in the colon and there are minimal or no steroid related side effects. So these are the steroidal agents used in inflammatory bowel disease. Now imagine a patient is having steroid dependent inflammatory bowel disease. And if the patient is having steroid dependent inflammatory bowel disease, in these patients what we use azathioprine and 6-mercaptopurine. Okay, so see what's the use of azathioprine and 6-mercaptopurine. Clear? So these agents are used in the management of steroid dependent inflammatory bowel disease. See the other uses. So azathioprine and 6-mercaptopurine are used in the management of steroid dependent inflammatory bowel disease. Second, it is used in the maintenance therapy in both Crohn's disease as well as ulcerative colitis, and it is effective in the treatment of active perianal disease and fistula in patients of Crohn's disease. Clear? So these are the uses of azathioprine and 6-mercaptopurine. Another drug which we use is methotrexate. It's the methotrexate. This methotrexate is effective in inducing remission and reducing steroid doses. Second, it is effective in maintaining remission in active Crohn's disease. Clear? And there is promising role of methotrexate in maintenance therapy in both Crohn's as well as in ulcerative colitis. So these are the uses of methotrexate. Two drugs which are used for refractory inflammatory bowel disease. First, if patient is having refractory ulcerative colitis, we use cyclosporine. Cyclosporine is only used for ulcerative colitis patient, which case if the patient is having refractory ulcerative colitis. And the second is tacrolimus. Tacrolimus is used in both patients of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis which are having refractory disease. Clear? So first we are going to discuss cyclosporine. Cyclosporine. So it is used in severe ulcerative colitis, refractory to IV glucocorticoids. You have to remember this word refractory because this was asked many times in NEET PG and DNB. Refractory to IV glucocorticoids. So it is only used in the patients of ulcerative colitis, whereas tacrolimus is used in both patients of Crohn's disease as well as in patients of ulcerative colitis. So the second agent is tacrolimus. Clear? So it is used in both patients of Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis who are having refractory disease. Tacrolimus is having good efficacy in children who are having inflammatory bowel disease, and it is also used in adults with extensive small intestinal involvement. Apart from extensive small intestinal involvement, it is also used in adults who are having steroid dependent or refractory Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. Clear? So steroid dependent or refractory Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, and it is used in refractory fistulizing Crohn's disease. So again you have to remember that cyclosporine is used in refractory ulcerative colitis, tacrolimus is used in refractory Crohn's disease as well as ulcerative colitis. Now see the anti-TNF therapies which we use in inflammatory bowel disease. Anti-TNF therapies. Anti-TNF therapies are asked in medicine, surgery, pharma frequently. So first see what are the agents which are used. So we use infliximab, adalimumab, certolizumab, pegol and golimumab. Okay. In this group, infliximab as well as adalimumab, these are used in patients of both Crohn's disease as well as ulcerative colitis. So infliximab and adalimumab is used in both Crohn's disease as well as ulcerative colitis. Certolizumab pegol, it's only used in the patients of Crohn's disease, only in the Crohn's disease, and golimumab, it's used only in the patients of ulcerative colitis. So this you have to remember. Now one by one we are going to discuss. First we are going to discuss the infliximab. So what is this infliximab? It is the chimeric IgG1 antibody against TNF-alpha. Chimeric IgG1 antibody against TNF-alpha. What are the uses of infliximab in inflammatory bowel disease? So it is used in active Crohn's disease, refractory to steroids or and 6-mercaptopurine or aminosalicylic acid. It is used in Crohn's disease with refractory perianal or enterocutaneous fistula, and it is used for the treatment of moderate to severely active ulcerative colitis. So these are the indications of infliximab. Now see the important points related to adalimumab. Okay, so we discussed just like infliximab, adalimumab is also used for both Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. Adalimumab is humanized recombinant IgG1 monoclonal antibody against TNF-alpha. Humanized recombinant IgG1 monoclonal antibody, and it is used for the treatment of moderate to severe Crohn's disease as well as ulcerative colitis. The third agent is certolizumab pegol. It is certolizumab pegol, and we discussed it is only used for the patients of Crohn's disease. So this certolizumab pegol is recombinant Fab antibody fragment against TNF-alpha. What? Fab, recombinant Fab antibody fragment against TNF-alpha, and it is used for the induction of clinical response in which patient? The patients who are having active inflammatory Crohn's disease. Now see the golimumab. The golimumab is human IgG1 antibody against TNF-alpha, human IgG1 antibody, and it is used for the treatment of moderate to severely active ulcerative colitis. So these are the anti-TNF therapies which are used in inflammatory bowel disease. Now we are going to discuss the anti-integrins. In this group we are using two agents. One is natalizumab and the second is vedolizumab. This natalizumab, it's only used in Crohn's disease. It is not used in the patients of ulcerative colitis. Whereas vedolizumab, it is used in both patients of Crohn's disease as well as ulcerative colitis. And you must be knowing that this natalizumab, apart from its use in Crohn's disease, it's very useful drug in which other condition? Multiple sclerosis. So one by one we are going to discuss anti-integrins. Okay, the first agent is natalizumab. This drug was asked many times in AIIMS. So the first question and most frequently asked question about natalizumab is that it is recombinant humanized IgG4 antibody against which integrins? So against alpha 4 integrins. Recombinant humanized IgG4 antibody against alpha 4 integrins. We discussed that it is used in the patients of Crohn's disease. It is also used in the patients of multiple sclerosis. Clear? So in which particular group we are using this? Yes, it is used in the patients of Crohn's disease for induction and maintenance therapy. For the patients who are refractory or intolerant to anti-TNF therapies we discussed. So if a patient of Crohn's disease is refractory or patient is not able to tolerate anti-TNF agents, we are going to give natalizumab. The second agent which is used is vedolizumab. This is vedolizumab, and this vedolizumab is the monoclonal antibody against alpha 4 beta 7 integrins. Monoclonal antibody against alpha 4 beta 7 integrins. It is used in both patients of Crohn's disease as well as ulcerative colitis. In which particular group? The patients with inadequate response to glucocorticoids anti-TNF therapies or immunomodulators. Clear? So this is the list of drugs which are used in the management of inflammatory bowel disease. Now we are going to discuss the management of inflammatory bowel disease. So first see the management of mild to moderate Crohn's disease. Okay, so for mild to moderate Crohn's disease, for inducing remission, we give budesonide, and we discussed that the most common site of involvement in Crohn's disease is ileum, ileocecal region, and cecum means colon. So this is for ileum and right colon. And for maintenance therapy, we use sulfasalazine. Clear? So sulfasalazine, this is used for maintenance therapy. If we are using sulfasalazine and there is no improvement, in those cases for inducing remission, obviously steroids should be used. So which agent we use? Prednisone. If patient is having steroid dependent Crohn's disease, so we discussed that for steroid dependent Crohn's disease, what are the agents we can use? We can use azathioprine, 6-mercaptopurine or methotrexate. So these agents, azathioprine, 6-mercaptopurine or methotrexate, these are used in the patients who are having steroid dependent Crohn's disease. Now see, if there is no response to 6-mercaptopurine or azathioprine and patient is refractory to these agents, in those cases we have to start anti-TNF therapy. So what are the agents we use in the patients of Crohn's disease? We use infliximab, adalimumab or certolizumab pegol. So this is how we manage the patients of mild to moderate Crohn's disease. Now see the management of moderate to severe Crohn's disease. There is variation in the management protocol given in various books. We followed Harrison. So whatever the management protocol we are going to discuss, it is strictly based on Harrison. Now see, management of moderate to severe Crohn's disease. So in these patients for maintenance therapy, we use 6-mercaptopurine or azathioprine or methotrexate, and we are using anti-TNF therapy, infliximab, adalimumab, certolizumab pegol. So this is for maintenance therapy. Clear? So for maintenance therapy in moderate to severe Crohn's disease, we use 6-mercaptopurine, azathioprine or methotrexate plus infliximab or adalimumab or certolizumab pegol. If patient is refractory or intolerant to anti-TNF therapy, in these patients we have to give anti-integrins. And what are the agents? Natalizumab or vedolizumab. So we give anti-integrins. Clear? Natalizumab or vedolizumab. Okay, if there is no improvement even after anti-integrins, so for inducing remission we have to give intravenous glucocorticoids. And even after intravenous glucocorticoid, if there is no improvement, and in these patients we have to start what? Total parenteral nutrition. So this is how we manage the patients of moderate to severe Crohn's disease. Now we are going to discuss the management of fistulizing Crohn's disease. So in this case there is involvement of anus or perianal region. Imagine patient is having abscess. So in that situation we go for what? Incision and drainage. And apart from incision and drainage, what else should be added? Antibiotics should be given. If the patient is having active perianal disease, so we discussed that for active perianal disease generally we use anti-TNF agents. What are the agents which are given in Crohn's? Infliximab, adalimumab, certolizumab pegol. Plus minus we can add mercaptopurine, azathioprine or methotrexate. So for active perianal disease we give the combination. What is the preferred agent? Anti-TNF agents are preferred. Plus minus we can add 6-mercaptopurine or azathioprine or methotrexate. Now see, if there is intolerance or there is no response to anti-TNF agents, so if there is no response after anti-TNF therapy, a patient is not able to tolerate anti-TNF therapy, in those patients we have to give anti-integrins. So generally we give what? Anti-integrins. Clear? Natalizumab or vedolizumab. And even after anti-integrins, if there is no improvement in such patients, what we start? Total parenteral nutrition. So this is how we manage fistulizing Crohn's disease. Now see the management of mild to moderate ulcerative colitis. So in mild to moderate ulcerative colitis, the mainstay of treatment is 5-amino-salicylic acid, so 5 ASA agents, and generally it is given orally and or rectally. So it can be given by oral route and or by rectal route. See, even after 5 ASA agent administration, there is no improvement in those patients. We have to start the glucocorticoids. Initially we start rectal glucocorticoids, and if there is no improvement, what we are going to shift to oral glucocorticoids. So after 5 ASA agents use, no improvement, start rectal glucocorticoid. If there is no improvement, switch to oral glucocorticoid. If patient is steroid dependent, we discussed that for steroid dependent ulcerative colitis, what are the agents we can give? 6-mercaptopurine or azathioprine. So here you can see we use 6-mercaptopurine or azathioprine. Now imagine a situation that patient is refractory to 6-mercaptopurine or azathioprine. So in these patients we have to start what? Anti-TNF agents. So we have to start anti-TNF therapy. Clear? And here you can see we use certolizumab pegol in Crohn's disease, that is exclusively used in Crohn's, and in ulcerative colitis it's the golimumab. So here you can see we are giving infliximab or adalimumab or golimumab. So this is how we are going to manage the patients of mild to moderate ulcerative colitis. Now see the management of moderate to severe ulcerative colitis. So in moderate to severe ulcerative colitis, for inducing remission, we have to start glucocorticoids by which route? Oral route. Why? Here the patient is having moderate to severe ulcerative colitis, and if there is no response, yes, you have to switch oral glucocorticoids to IV glucocorticoids. So glucocorticoid is not used for maintenance therapy, it is just for remission. Okay, for maintenance therapy, what are the agents we use? 6-mercaptopurine or azathioprine plus infliximab. So these are the agents which are used for maintenance therapy. Now see, after using these agents there is no improvement, then we have to switch the agents. Anti-TNF agents are changed. So what are the options if there is no improvement after use of infliximab? So change the agent. So at the place of infliximab, we are giving either adalimumab or golimumab. And the patients who are refractory to steroid, we discussed that cyclosporine is given to the patients of severe ulcerative colitis which are refractory to steroids. And if there is inadequate response, so patient is having refractory ulcerative colitis, there is inadequate response to steroids. Clear? In those cases we have to give vedolizumab, and you know this is an anti-integrins. So this is how we manage the patients of moderate to severe ulcerative colitis. Now we are going to discuss the indications of surgery in inflammatory bowel disease. So how to remember and how to solve the MCQs easily. See, whenever we are angry, whenever we are frustrated, we are using one term or one word starting with the letter F, OFAC. Clear? So how to remember? The mnemonic is OFAC, indications of surgery. So see, what are the indications of surgery? Indications of surgery in inflammatory bowel disease. Clear? And how to remember? The mnemonic is OFAC. Clear? By this mnemonic you can solve most of the MCQs related to indications of surgery. O means obstruction, H means hemorrhage, F fistula. What kind of fistula? Fistula which is refractory to conservative management, A abscess, and C carcinoma. So obstruction, hemorrhage, fistula, abscess, carcinoma. This is applicable for both ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. You must be knowing that this fistula and abscess, it is more common in Crohn's disease. It is rarely seen in ulcerative colitis. Clear? So if you see ulcerative colitis, the indications will be related to obstruction, hemorrhage, and carcinoma. So one by one we are going to discuss. First we are going to discuss what are the indications of surgery in Crohn's disease. Indications of surgery in Crohn's disease. Okay. So in Crohn's disease, the indications of surgery are different for small intestine and it's different for colon and anorectum. So we are going to discuss what are the indications of surgery in small intestine or small intestine related conditions. Okay, and what are the indications related to colon and anorectum. Colon and anorectum. Clear? Rectum is not involved, so generally it is related to anus or perianal conditions. Now see the indications related to small intestine. It's stricture and obstruction which is unresponsive to medical management. So stricture and obstruction which is unresponsive to medical management. Clear? If there is massive hemorrhage, patient is having refractory fistula and abscess. So if you see the mnemonic OFAC, obstruction, hemorrhage, fistula, abscess, it is there. So these are the indications related to small intestine. Now see the indications related to colon and anus. So if the patient is having intractable disease or fulminant disease, both intractable and fulminant disease. If the patient is having perianal disease and that perianal disease is unresponsive to medical management, patient is having fistula. What kind of fistula? Refractory fistula. If there is obstruction, for cancer prophylaxis. Why? Because Crohn's disease increases the risk of both small intestinal and large intestinal malignancy. So if we suspect malignancy, we have to remove that part of bowel. So for cancer prophylaxis also we go for surgery. And if patient is having frank dysplasia or carcinoma, in that case also we have to remove the affected part. So these are the indications of surgery in Crohn's disease. Now see, what are the indications of surgery in ulcerative colitis? Indications of surgery in ulcerative colitis. This is very important and this question was asked many times. So indications are intractability, dysplasia or carcinoma, massive colonic bleeding and toxic megacolon. You know that toxic megacolon is a life-threatening condition. Now if you remember the mnemonic OFAC, we are going to apply that. So O means obstruction. So what happens? In toxic megacolon there is obstruction. H means hemorrhage. So here you can see that there is massive colonic bleeding. We discussed fistula and abscess. This is seen in Crohn's disease and it's rarely seen in ulcerative colitis. And C means carcinoma. So here you can see carcinoma. The indications of surgery are intractability, dysplasia or carcinoma, massive colonic hemorrhage or bleeding and toxic megacolon. Second important point, we already discussed that what is the role of surgery in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. We discussed that surgery is curative in ulcerative colitis and it is palliative in Crohn's disease. Why? Because in ulcerative colitis there is involvement of rectum and then cranially it is going to involve the colon and there is continuous involvement. That's why we can go for total proctocolectomy in ulcerative colitis, which is curative. But what's the problem in Crohn's disease? There is involvement of any part of bowel from mouth to anus. That's why in patients of Crohn's disease, only most severely affected part is removed, which is responsible for complication. Diseased part is not always removed. The diseased part which is most severely affected and responsible for complication, that is removed. So on an average, in patients of Crohn's disease, generally 3 to 5 surgeries are done lifetime. Clear? So surgery is curative in ulcerative colitis and palliative in Crohn's disease. So what are the surgical options in ulcerative colitis? And what's the logic of using those options? Surgical options in ulcerative colitis. So in ulcerative colitis there is involvement of rectum and the colon. So what we can go for? We can remove this whole colon as well as rectum. So if you remove the whole colon and rectum, this surgery is total proctocolectomy. Clear? Now, after total proctocolectomy, whether we have to go for ileostomy or whether we have to go for pouch, it depends upon the sphincter function. So if patient is young having good sphincter function, we can go for creation of pouch, and that is known as ileal pouch anal anastomosis. But if patient is having poor sphincter function or patient who are having incontinence, in those cases with total proctocolectomy we go for end ileostomy. One principle. Second principle, imagine a patient coming to you in emergency with perforation peritonitis, and in emergency generally we avoid pelvic surgery. So if patient comes with perforation peritonitis in emergency, in those cases we perform removal of whole colon, and that is known as total abdominal colectomy. So in this case we just remove the colon, we leave the rectum. Clear? So we perform total abdominal colectomy and plus we go for ileostomy. So this is the basic principle which we are going to apply. So these are the surgical options. First, total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis, and you know this is the definitive treatment or treatment of choice, and generally it is preferred in young patients who can tolerate the surgery, and the patient should be having good sphincter function. The patients should be having good sphincter function. Okay, imagine if patient is having poor sphincter function. So if there is poor sphincter function or there is old patient, in those patients we go for total proctocolectomy plus end ileostomy. Previously, we were creating ileal reservoir, also known as cock pouch, but nowadays this is not preferred. Why? Because if we create ileal pouch, which is known as cock pouch, that is associated with increased risk of complications. So generally we are not creating cock pouch nowadays. And what's the role of total abdominal colectomy in plus ileostomy? So these are the patients who comes to us in emergency with perforation peritonitis, and we discussed that in emergency we are going to avoid pelvic surgery. So generally we are going to leave rectum as such, we are going to avoid pelvic surgery, so we perform total abdominal colectomy and we perform the ileostomy. So these are the surgical options. One by one we are going to discuss. First we are going to discuss total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis. So we are going to discuss that how we are going to perform this total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis. So we discussed that this is definitive treatment. This is definitive treatment of ulcerative colitis, and it is preferred in young patient because it's extensive surgery, so patient should tolerate the surgery. And second important point, there should not be any rectal dysplasia. So it is preferred in young patients, and there should not be any rectal dysplasia. So there is no rectal dysplasia, then only we go for this surgery. Okay, now see which part of bowel is removed. So here you can see we remove some part of ileum. We are going to remove the whole colon and the whole rectum. So here we are going to remove some part of terminal ileum, whole colon and rectum. So this is total proctocolectomy. Now, what is the function of rectum? The rectum is fecal reservoir. So in this case, after surgery, you can see what is left from above ileum and from below anal canal. So we cannot just go for the anastomosis of ileum to anal canal directly. Now imagine this is the rectum. What is the function of rectum? It's the fecal reservoir. Now we are just left with anal canal, and from above there is ileum. So if you are just going for the anastomosis of ileum to anal canal, this reservoir function is lost. And what is the problem? It is going to increase the stool frequency. In certain cases it is 10 to 15 times per day. That's why we have to create a pouch of ileum. So what kind of pouch? This J-shaped pouch is generally created, and after creating this J-shaped pouch we go for anastomosis. So this is ileal pouch, and we are going to anastomose it with anal canal. So what's the name? Ileal pouch anal anastomosis. So this is ileal pouch anal anastomosis. Okay, how we create this J-shaped pouch? So here you can see these are the two loops of ileum, Then we are going to fire the stapler so that there is continuity between the lumen, and here you can see there is continuity between the lumen, and we are going to perform the anastomosis with anal canal. So how it looks like? So after anastomosis, this is how it looks like. Okay, there are other types of pouches also which are created. One is S-shaped pouch, another is W-shaped pouch. So see the various shapes of pouches. So these are the various shapes of pouches. Which one is most preferred? It's the J-shaped pouch. This is most preferred. Clear? So this is how we make the pouch. After that, lots of questions are asked related to complications of total proctocolectomy and ileal pouch anal anastomosis. So after this procedure, what are the complications? First, see, ulcerative colitis is an inflammatory bowel disease, and in this there is inflammation which is going on. Okay, whenever we are going to create the pouch, in the pouch also there is inflammation, and inflammation starts in the pouch. So inflammation starts in the pouch, and this complication is known as pouchitis. This is the most common complication, and it is seen in 7 to 33% of cases in post-operative period. Second, in total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis, you can see that lower abdominal surgery is performed and extensive pelvic surgery is performed. And because of this extensive lower abdominal and pelvic surgery, there is increased risk of adhesions. And because of this adhesions, there is adhesive small intestinal obstruction, and this is seen in 25% patients. So this question was asked in AIIMS. Question: what's the complication? What are the complications after total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis in ulcerative colitis? Clear? So most common complication, this was the question. It is pouchitis. You have to remember the percentage also. It is 7 to 33%. Second most common complication, small bowel obstruction, and this is seen in 25% cases. What are the other complications? These two you have to remember. The other complications. So in these cases, there can be pelvic sepsis. Sometimes there is leak. And what kind of leak? There can be anastomotic leak, or there can be leak from the pouch suture line. And sometimes there is formation of fistula known as pouch vaginal fistula. So these are the complications. Now sometimes examiner is going to twist the question. See, we discussed that this total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis, it is done in two conditions. First, you discussed and you told me it's ulcerative colitis, and the second we discussed familial adenomatous polyposis. For both of these conditions, we perform total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis, and this is the treatment of choice for both of the conditions. Now see, in familial adenomatous polyposis, after creation of pouch, there is no inflammation. So if there is no inflammation of pouch, so what is the most common complication in FAP after this surgery? It is small bowel obstruction. And what is the most common complication in ulcerative colitis after this surgery? It is pouchitis. Clear? So you have to read the question carefully. You have to read the question carefully, see whether the question has been asked related to ulcerative colitis or FAP. Clear? So these are two most commonly asked questions related to complications. Sometimes examiners are asking this question, that in this particular special situation, what is the preferred treatment in ulcerative colitis? So see the special situations. In special situations, what's the preferred treatment in ulcerative colitis? Okay, one by one we are going to discuss. Now imagine an older patient who is having fecal incontinence. Clear? So in such patient, you will create pouch or not? So if the patient is having fecal incontinence, there is no point in creation of pouch. So after performing total proctocolectomy, what should be done? We perform end ileostomy. So we perform what? End ileostomy. Okay. Second situation, if the patient is having confirmed rectal dysplasia. So in such patients, after total proctocolectomy, we have to perform mucosectomy and we have to go for hand sewn ileal pouch anal anastomosis. Clear? So after total proctocolectomy, since there is dysplasia, rectal dysplasia, so we go for mucosectomy with hand sewn ileal pouch anal anastomosis. Clear? Now see the third situation, the patients who have significant debility. These patients are not going to tolerate the long duration surgery, especially the pelvic surgeries. And in such patient, what is the preferred surgical treatment here? Since the patient is not able to tolerate pelvic surgery, which is extensive, here we go for total abdominal colectomy with very low Hartmann's closure, very low Hartmann's closure, okay, with end ileostomy, okay. So these are the special situations, and in these special situation, this is the kind of treatment which is done. So we have to read the question carefully and then only we have to mark the correct answer. Now see this image, this patient is having multiple fistula and abscess. Clear? So what? This patient is having what? Perianal Crohn's or Crohn's disease of anorectum. Clear? So we are going to discuss Crohn's disease of anorectum. Clear? Or perianal Crohn's. So these patients have multiple fistula, there is perianal abscess. So what? These perianal symptoms are most devastating. It is painful also, and in certain conditions it can lead to incontinence. So what's the problem? These manifestations are most devastating. These are painful and it can lead to incontinence. So it's a threat to patients' incontinence. Threat to incontinence. Okay. Now two important points which you have to remember, that the perianal Crohn's is painful, but the fistula in Crohn's disease is painless. What? These manifestations, since patient is having abscess, so that's painful. So perianal manifestations are painful, but fistula is painless. Fistula is painless. Clear? You have to remember. Generally, how many patients of Crohn's disease are having these kind of perianal manifestation? So it is seen in 20% patients. 20% patients of Crohn's disease have the perianal manifestations. Now coming to the presentations. So generally there are three kinds of presentation. Which one is most common? There is ulceration. The other presentations are fistula and stricture. So what are the presentations? Ulceration, fistula and stricture. Okay. And out of these, which one is the most common manifestation? This is one question which is asked frequently. So this is the ulceration. Okay. Now, what kind of fistula is seen in patients of Crohn's disease? So the characteristic feature of fistula is that it's cyanotic, chronic, indurated and painless. Cyanotic, chronic, indurated and painless fistula. Right? And how to remember? It's very easy to remember. The mnemonic is CHIP. Okay. So C means cyanotic, CH means chronic, I means indurated, and P means painless. Clear? These are the manifestations. Now see, what is the presentation and what are the clinical manifestations? So clinical features. So we discussed that these patients have stricture. Okay, in these patients there is perianal abscess. Clear? And whenever this abscess rupture or it is going to burst, it can lead to what? Fistula formation. We discussed the characteristic features of fistula. And what else? We discussed the most common manifestation, that is ulceration. Now see, it's easy to understand the symptom. if a patient is having abscess, because of this abscess, what are the symptoms? So patient will be having pain, patient will be having fever, and sometimes because of ulceration there is bleeding. And we discussed that perianal Crohn's disease is a threat to patient's continence. So what are the problems? Because of abscess there is pain, it can lead to fever, there is swelling because of abscess. These are related to abscess. Other manifestations, it can lead to bleeding, clear, and there is increased risk of fecal swelling or incontinence. Increased risk of fecal swelling and incontinence, clear. Now how we investigate the patient? So here first we perform the inspection. So on inspection you can see whether there is abscess, whether there is any fistula, what is the location of external opening, how many fistulas are there. After that we have to perform the investigations. First we perform the digital rectal examination to localize the internal opening if there is fistula, clear. Second, we can go for proctoscopy or proctosigmoidoscopy. So what are the investigations are done, or how we are going to evaluate the patient? So for patient evaluation we perform inspection, we perform digital rectal examination, and sometimes proctoscopy or proctosigmoidoscopy. We go for proctosigmoidoscopy, clear. Okay, most of the patients of Crohn's disease for perianal manifestation, patients are treated conservatively. So in which case surgical treatment is required. Imagine the patient is having pain, and why there is pain? Because of undrained abscess or poorly drained abscess. So see the important points related to management. Majority of patients are managed conservatively. So majority of patients are managed conservatively. Okay, so in which patients we have to go for surgery? Surgery is mainly done in such patients for pain. And what's the cause of pain? The patient is having either undrained abscess. So generally we go for incision and drainage. So patient is having undrained abscess, or certain patients are having poorly drained abscess. Poorly drained abscess, clear. So this is related to abscess. Now see the important points related to fissure which is present in patients of Crohn's disease. If you see a typical patient of fissure, what is the location? Generally it is located posteriorly in the midline, and it is located at 6 o'clock position, clear. And how we are going to treat? The treatment of choice is Notaras lateral sphincterotomy. This is the typical fissure. But what is the problem in Crohn's disease? The patients of Crohn's disease are having multiple fissure. These patients are having multiple fissures, and generally it is located off the midline. Second problem, it's located off the midline, and typically the treatment of choice is Notaras lateral sphincterotomy. But in patients of Crohn's disease we have to avoid fissurectomy or lateral sphincterotomy. So what? We have to avoid fissurectomy or lateral sphincterotomy. Clear? Third, related to fistulizing Crohn's disease, or the patients of Crohn's disease who are having fistula, there is one agent which helps in fistula closure. So we discussed in the management what? Infliximab. So this is used in fistulizing Crohn's disease, clear. And what's the rate of fistula closure after the use of this agent? The rate of fistula closure is 25 to 67%. Okay, so these are the basics in relation to the management of perianal Crohn's disease. Now see the staged approach which we follow in the management of Crohn's disease, especially the perianal manifestations. So the staged approach for perianal disease. Staged approach for perianal disease. So first we have to control the sepsis. It means if the patient is having abscess, we have to go for incision and drainage. And what should be given? We have to give antibiotics. Okay. Certain patients are having fistula. What kind of? Chronic draining fistula. So if patient is having chronic draining fistula, in these cases we are going to use non-cutting ceton. And what's the other name of non-cutting ceton? It's also known as draining ceton. Draining ceton. Clear? How we use it? Have a look. So in this picture, you can see that patient developed abscess. So if there is abscess, we have to perform incision and drainage and we have to give antibiotics. If patient is having chronic draining fistula, sometimes there is residual pus, residual infection inside the tract. So what we do, we insert a ceton and we apply it loosely so that this ceton is acting as a drain, and via this ceton, whatever the pus collection is there, infection, it is drained. So whenever there is control of local sepsis, we have to give infliximab because it helps in fistula closure. After 2 to 3 infusions of infliximab, generally we have to remove the ceton so that the fistula closure occurs. Clear? So infliximab, generally it is given after control of local sepsis. After control of local sepsis. And after 2 to 3 infusion, what? We have to remove the ceton. Why? Remove the ceton. Why? Because we have to facilitate the fistula closure. So generally the ceton is removed so that fistula closure is going to occur. Now imagine a condition that local sepsis is resolved. Despite of that, what? Fistula closure is not occurring. So despite of resolution of local sepsis, if fistula closure is not occurring, in those cases we go for surgery. So what? If fistula persists, despite of resolution of local sepsis, clear? So this is the staged approach for perianal disease in the patients of Crohn's. Many times important points are asked related to colitis associated colon cancer and sporadic colon cancer. Sporadic colon cancer, which we discussed in colon, large intestine carcinoma colon, and colitis associated colon cancer means this carcinoma is seen in the patients of ulcerative colitis or patients of inflammatory bowel disease. So see what are the differences. Differences between colitis associated colon cancer and sporadic colon cancer. Okay, so we discussed in the chapter of colon, when we were discussing sporadic colon cancer, that generally it is arising from polyps. Which kind of polyp? Adenomatous polyp. Generally these are adenocarcinomas, more common on left side, generally seen in elderly age, approximately 5th to 6th decade, and anaplastic or mucinous varieties were uncommon. This was the basic. Now see the differences. So see the parameters. Colitis associated colon cancer, it arises from flat dysplasia. So it arises from flat dysplasia or dysplasia associated lesion or mass. And sporadic colon cancer, it's going to arise from adenomatous polyps. Adenomatous polyps. Clear? Multiple synchronous colon cancer. Relatively, it is more common in colitis associated colon cancer as compared to sporadic. So what's the percentage? You have to remember because this was asked. 12% in colitis associated colon cancer and 3% in sporadic colon cancer. We discussed that inflammatory bowel disease is going to occur in 2nd to 3rd decade and patients are going to develop malignancy usually within 10 years. Or after that. So what is the mean age of development of malignancy in colitis associated colon cancer? It is 30 years. 30 years. And what's the mean age in sporadic colon cancer? It's 60 years. Distribution. So we discussed in sporadic colon cancer, it is left-sided. So there was left-sided predominance in sporadic colon cancer. But in colitis associated colon cancer, it is distributed uniformly. It's distributed uniformly. And if we see the mucinous and anaplastic variety, relatively it is more common in colitis associated colon cancer, whereas it's rare in sporadic colon cancer. You have to remember, because previously in All India 2 to 3 questions were asked. Clear? So this is the difference. So here we discussed that colitis associated colon cancer means it is seen in patients of inflammatory bowel disease. So both patients of Crohn's disease as well as patients of ulcerative colitis are having increased risk of carcinoma colon. So see the risk of various important malignancies in ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. If you are talking about only colonic carcinoma, so the risk is equal in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. But if you see small intestinal malignancy, since Crohn's disease most common site is ileum, and in small intestinal malignancy seen in inflammatory bowel disease, most common site is also ileum. Here the risk is more in Crohn's disease as compared to ulcerative colitis. And if you're talking about cholangiocarcinoma, for cholangiocarcinoma there is a risk factor, important risk factor, primary sclerosing cholangitis, and you must be knowing that this is more commonly associated with which condition? Yes, ulcerative colitis. So here the risk is more in ulcerative colitis because of its association with primary sclerosing cholangitis. So these 3 questions are also asked. So see, what are the risk factors for colonic cancer in ulcerative colitis? Risk factors for colonic cancer in ulcerative colitis. So it's the duration of colitis. First, so increased duration is going to increase the risk of malignancy. Extent of colonic involvement, whether patient is having primary sclerosing cholangitis or not, whether there is family history of colorectal carcinoma or not, and if the patient is having pancolitis, and obviously if disease is diagnosed at young age, all these are the risk factor. So in exam there are certain catchy points which you have to remember, like duration of colitis, extent of colonic involvement, primary sclerosing cholangitis and positive family history, and young age, disease diagnosed at young age. So all these are important risk factors for colonic cancer in ulcerative colitis. Now see the important points related to ulcerative colitis related colorectal cancer. What are the important points of ulcerative colitis related colorectal cancer? So these cancers are multicentric, evenly distributed, infiltrative, highly aggressive, poorly differentiated. If you read these important points, yes, what is the impression? You are having this kind of impression that obviously the prognosis should be very poor in comparison to sporadic colon cancer, but it's not like that. If we are going to compare the prognosis of sporadic colon cancer and the prognosis of ulcerative colitis related colorectal cancer, the prognosis is almost similar. So despite of these aggressive features, what the prognosis is almost similar. So there is similar prognosis in colorectal cancer of ulcerative colitis and sporadic colorectal cancer. So sometimes examiner is giving the features in the question, and in option, one of the option will be given that the prognosis in colorectal cancer seen in ulcerative colitis is poor as compared to sporadic colorectal cancer? So it's not like that. It is almost similar. So we discussed one of the important factor for colon cancer in ulcerative colitis is duration. So what happens with duration? There is progressive increase in the risk of malignancy. So how much is the cumulative risk of cancer in relation to duration? Very important point. Cumulative risk of cancer, it increases with duration of ulcerative colitis. So see how much is the cumulative risk. So if the duration is 25 years, so if the duration of ulcerative colitis is 25 years, how much is the risk? 25%. If the duration is 30 years, it is 35%. If it is 35 years, can you see, it is 45%. And if the duration of ulcerative colitis is 40 years, can you see how much is the risk? 65%. So there is progressive increase in the risk of colorectal cancer with increase in the duration of ulcerative colitis. Now see the risk of malignancy in Crohn's pancolitis also. So what's the risk of malignancy in Crohn's pancolitis? And here also it depends on the duration. So there is 2% risk after 10 years. After 10 years of Crohn's pancolitis, there is 2% risk. And what happens? After 20 years, this risk becomes 8%. And what happens after 30 years? After 30 years, the risk is 18%. So after 30 years, it is 18%. Both of these questions are asked, so you have to remember the percentage and the duration. The question which was asked previously, this was the question, that after 25 years duration of ulcerative colitis, how much is the cumulative risk of malignancy of colorectal cancer? And it is 25%. So this was the question. Now another famous question which is asked in relation to Crohn's disease, and it's related to malignancy, that in patients of Crohn's disease, what's the most common cause of death? And the most common cause of death in patients of Crohn's disease is the malignancy. So important point, most common cause of death in patients of Crohn's disease is malignancy. Okay, and what are the other complications which can lead to death? Sepsis, thromboembolic complications, or dyselectrolytemia. So other causes which can lead to death, it can be because of sepsis, thromboembolic complications, dyselectrolytemia, or electrolyte disorder. But the most common cause of death is malignancy. So these are the important points asked related to malignancy in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Now see this image. In this you can see the whole colon is massively distended. Can you see? The whole colon is massively distended, and this condition is known as toxic megacolon. So what's the name of this condition? This is toxic megacolon. Okay, it's rare, but it's life-threatening condition. Now see what happens. You know that bowel is sensitive to stretch. So just like balloon, if bowel is distending, we keep on distending the bowel. What happens? There is ischemia. And if it is going to distend beyond a point, what happens? Perfusion is affected and there is necrosis. It can lead to perforation. So bowel is sensitive to stretch. Distension of bowel can cause ischemia and it can lead to perforation. This toxic megacolon is a life-threatening condition. Why? Because if it's not treated within time, it can lead to perforation. Okay, so question, what are the risk factors for toxic megacolon? The most common risk factor is ulcerative colitis. It is also seen in patients of Crohn's disease. It is also seen in the patients of infectious colitis like pseudomembranous colitis. So what are the risk factors? The most common risk factor is ulcerative colitis. It is also seen in the patients of Crohn's disease and infectious colitis like pseudomembranous colitis. Okay, what are the sequence of events? In this case, there is massive distension. There is massive distension of colon, and it leads to what? Ischemia. And because of this ischemia, what's the problem? It can lead to necrosis, and because of this necrosis, what? There can be perforation. It can lead to perforation. Okay, so how we are going to diagnose this condition? These patients are generally having signs and symptoms of large bowel obstruction usually, and these patients have underlying condition like Crohn's disease, like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, or pseudomembranous colitis. So how we make the diagnosis? By radiological investigations. Which one? Plain X-ray abdomen. So what are the findings which are seen on plain X-ray? Have a look. Now see this X-ray. Can you see this arrow? So what? There is presence of air in the bowel wall. So what is this? This is known as pneumatosis. What you can see here first, there is pneumatosis. Okay, so there is pneumatosis. Second, you can see that in this X-ray there is presence of multiple bowel loops which are dilated, placed peripherally, and there is presence of haustration. It means it's a large bowel obstruction. If you see this transverse colon carefully, you can see the presence of haustration here in ascending colon. Clear? But if you see the transverse colon here, the haustrations are almost nil, means it is reduced or either absent. So here you see, generally in patients of toxic megacolon, the transverse colon diameter is more than 6 cm, and when there is massive distension of transverse colon, obviously there is reduced or absent haustrations. So what are the findings which we get on plain X-ray abdomen? See the findings. Okay, first you noticed that these patients have what? Pneumatosis. So there is pneumatosis. What else you noticed? Dilated bowel loops. Dilated bowel loops placed peripherally. Placed peripherally. And the bowel loop which is specifically having toxic megacolon, in that haustrations are either reduced. Haustrations, these are either reduced or absent. Clear? Clear? And in toxic megacolon, if you see the diameter of transverse colon, it is more than 6 cm. So respective diameters are also asked. What should be the diameter of cecum in toxic megacolon? It should be more than 12 cm. What should be the diameter of ascending colon? It should be more than 8 cm. Transverse colon, it should be more than 6 cm. And if you see descending colon, this part, descending colon or sigmoid, and here it should be more than 6.5 cm. So these values are very important. You have to remember. So see, what should be the diameter in patients of toxic megacolon? So the cecum diameter should be, we discussed, more than 12 cm. Ascending colon, more than 8 cm. Most commonly asked transverse colon, more than 6 cm, and for rectosigmoid and descending colon, it should be more than 6.5 cm. Now see this X-ray. This was asked 2 times in AIIMS as image based question. So first thing, what you can notice here, that there is presence of dilated bowel loops placed peripherally wider in caliber with presence of haustrations. So this is large bowel obstruction. So first diagnosis, you can see that in this case there is large bowel obstruction. Clear? Now just compare the right side and the left side. If you compare cecum ascending colon, here you can see that there is presence of haustration. Can you see? But if you see this sigmoid, if you see the descending colon and some part of transverse colon, can you see it's smooth? So there is no haustrations. It means it is ahaustral colon, also known as pipe stem colon, also known as lead pipe sign, and it's a characteristic feature of which condition? Ulcerative colitis. So this patient is suffering from ulcerative colitis. Can you see? There is pipe stem colon, ahaustral colon, or lead pipe sign. Second thing, here in transverse colon you can see that there is reduced haustration and it is massively distended, and the diameter, if it's more than 6 cm, it is what? Toxic megacolon. So what are the 3 diagnoses? This patient is having large bowel obstruction leading to what? toxic megacolon, and here what is the predisposing risk factor? Ulcerative colitis. Why? Because in this patient you noticed there is a haustral colon, which is also known as pipe stem colon, also known as lead pipe sign. So these are the image based questions which are asked. Now coming to the management, we can go for the conservative management in the patients who are having partial obstruction. But what's the problem of conservative management? That it's having high recurrence rate, and if there is recurrence we have to go for urgent laparotomy. So what's the management? We can go for medical management. We can go for medical management if patient is having partial obstruction. But what's the biggest problem of conservative management or medical management? That it's having high recurrence rate, and if there is recurrence we have to go for urgent laparotomy. So if there is recurrence we have to go for urgent laparotomy. That's why in majority of conditions what we go for surgery. So first we have to stabilize this patient. So how we stabilize the patients of obstruction? We give IV fluids. In this patient we start IV antibiotics, we go for nasogastric decompression, we insert the Foley's. Okay, so whenever the urine output is at least 1 ml per minute, when the patient is fully resuscitated, then only we take the patient for surgery. So what? First stabilize the patient, stabilization followed by surgery, and in stabilization we give IV fluids, IV antibiotics. Now simple question, which surgery should be done? We discussed that generally in emergency pelvic surgery should not be done, so we are not going to touch the rectum. So what we are going to do, we have to remove the whole colon. Okay, so generally what's done, we have to perform the total abdominal colectomy, and apart from total abdominal colectomy what else should be done? Ileostomy. So what we have to preserve here? Rectum. So what's the treatment which is done? The treatment, surgical treatment, it is total abdominal colectomy plus ileostomy. So it's the total abdominal colectomy plus ileostomy, and generally here we are going to preserve the rectum. So this is how we manage the patients of toxic megacolon. We discussed that in patients of ulcerative colitis the definitive treatment or treatment of choice is what? Total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis. Which one is the preferred pouch? This is the J-shaped pouch which is preferred. So ideally what should be the length of this pouch? 15 centimeter. Basic questions. Now the problem. Ulcerative colitis is inflammatory bowel disease. So after surgery what happens? There is inflammation of pouch, and the inflammation of pouch is known as pouchitis. So what happens? In this condition there is inflammation of mucosa of ileal pouch, and that is known as pouchitis. So here there is inflammation of mucosa of ileal pouch, mucosa of ileal pouch. Simple. We discussed that what is the incidence in patients of ulcerative colitis after total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis. It is 7 to 33%, and we discussed that this is the most common post-operative complication after total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis. Now see, what's the etiology? So the etiology of pouchitis is unknown. So the etiology is unknown. Yes, or what are the factors which can contribute? It can be related to bacterial overgrowth. Okay, so one simple question, if it's related to bacterial overgrowth, what we can give antibiotics in the treatment, and we can use probiotics in the treatment. Second, it can be related to mucosal ischemia or some local factors. Mucosal ischemia or some local factors, but exact etiology is unknown. Okay, now see after the surgery how the condition looks like. Now see this patient. In this patient total proctocolectomy plus ileal pouch anal anastomosis has been done. So here can you see this is the pouch which has been anastomosed to anus. Okay, for some moment just forget that this is what? Ileal pouch. Just imagine that this is the rectum. Okay, and if this is rectum and there is inflammation of rectum, this condition is known as proctitis. Okay, so what are the manifestations or symptoms of proctitis? The patients who are having proctitis, what happens? There is increased frequency of stools, means there is diarrhea, there is fever, there is pain, there is cramp. So similar manifestations will be there in pouchitis. Clear? So pouchitis manifestations are very similar to proctitis. So what are the clinical features here? So it is very similar to proctitis. So in these patients, there is increased frequency of stool. So because of this increased frequency of stool, means there is diarrhea, what happens? These patients are prone to develop dehydration. Dehydration, one. Second, these patients are going to develop fever. There is bleeding. There is cramps. Okay, now coming to the management, we discussed that this is because of bacterial overgrowth, so we have to use the antibiotics. But first thing, this patient is having dehydration, so in the management, what we have to do? Rehydration. So see the management, patient is prone to develop dehydration or patient is having dehydration, so what you do? Rehydration, so give IV fluids. Second, bacterial overgrowth is there, so what we give? Antibiotics. And when we were discussing the medical management of inflammatory bowel disease, we discussed that antibiotics are used in Crohn's disease. There is no use of antibiotics in active or quiescent ulcerative colitis. So in which particular condition we are supposed to use antibiotics? Pouchitis. Yes. So in this case, antibiotics, we discussed which antibiotics? Ciprofloxacin, or metronidazole. Okay, now the problem, certain patients are resistant, they are not improving even after antibiotics. So if there is no improvement in such patients, probiotics are helpful. If there is no improvement, so what we add? We add probiotics in the treatment. Okay, now imagine the patient is having significant pouchitis which is not responding to the medical management. In these patients, what we had to think or what we had to rule out? Yes, Crohn's disease. Why? Because the pouch is made of ileum, and in ileum there is significant inflammation. So if patient is having significant pouchitis not responding to medical management, we have to rule out what? Crohn's disease. So this is pouchitis. Now see, during MBBS, there is only one question which is asked in relation to Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And this question is generally asked in second prof in pathology. And what's the question? Difference between Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And when we go to final year, even in final year in both medicine and surgery, this question is asked. So the only one question which is asked in our MBBS time, and that is differences between Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. So we are going to summarize the differences between Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. So see the differences. First, the differences on the basis of macroscopic features. Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. Okay, first see the differences on the basis of macroscopic features. Macroscopic features. Okay, so first see the distribution of disease in Crohn's. Distribution. So we discussed that in Crohn's disease it is segmental, so there is presence of normal healthy areas in between, so there are skip areas. So this is segmental with skip areas. Segmental with skip areas. Clear? And in ulcerative colitis it is continuous without skip lesions, so there is continuous involvement. Okay, now coming to the location. So we discussed what's the most common site in Crohn's disease. So it's the ileum. So the most commonly involved segment, it is the ileum, ileocecal region, cecum and ascending colon. But the most commonly involved segment is ileum. And what about ulcerative colitis? In all patients, there is involvement of rectum, and then disease move cranially upwards. It move cranially upwards to involve the colon. Now see the extent of involvement. So in Crohn's disease, entire thickness of bowel is involved, and if you see the ulcerative colitis, grossly or macroscopically, it appears that only mucosa is involved. Ideally speaking, if you are looking into microscopic features also, 2 layers, mucosa, submucosa, are involved in ulcerative colitis, and microscopically mucosa, submucosa, muscularis propria, all the 3 layers are involved. So macroscopically, if you see extent, entire thickness of bowel wall is involved. So here, entire thickness of bowel wall is involved, okay, because this is transmural. And here macroscopically, disease appears superficial. It appears superficial, means there is involvement of mucosa, so appears confined to mucosa or confined to mucosal layer. Simple. Now what kind of ulcers are seen? Kind of ulcers which are seen in Crohn's disease. So we discussed there is presence of serpiginous ulcers, and these serpiginous ulcers are going to progress into deep ulcers. So in this you find serpiginous ulcers, okay, and later it might be converted into deep ulcers. Deep ulcers. Okay, what kind of ulcers are seen in ulcerative colitis? There is only superficial mucosal ulcer. So here in ulcerative colitis, we find superficial mucosal ulcers. Clear? So we discussed pseudopolyps, and we discussed that pseudopolyps are more common in ulcerative colitis. It can be seen in Crohn's disease, but it's rare in Crohn's. So pseudopolyp, these are rare in Crohn's, and it's common in ulcerative colitis. It's common. Now coming to the fibrosis. So fibrosis is common in Crohn's disease, but it's rare in ulcerative colitis. So see, fibrosis, it is common in Crohn's disease. It's common, and it's rare in ulcerative colitis. And if you see the shortening of bowel, shortening occurs in both Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. In Crohn's, the shortening is because of fibrosis, and in ulcerative colitis, the shortening is because of contraction of muscularis. So in both, we find shortening of bowel. In Crohn's, this shortening, it's because of fibrosis, and in ulcerative colitis, it's because of contraction of muscularis. It's because of contraction of muscularis. Important point, muscularis propria is not involved, but there is contraction. Clear? So in inflammation, muscularis propria is not involved in ulcerative colitis. Now see the differences between microscopic features. Differences between microscopic features. Okay, so first important point, depth of inflammation, and we discussed it is transmural in Crohn's disease, and it's involving only mucosa and submucosa in ulcerative colitis. So it is transmural, and if it's transmural, so all 3 layers are involved: mucosa plus submucosa plus muscularis propria. Simple. And in ulcerative colitis, there is only involvement of mucosa plus submucosa. Now see what kind of inflammation is seen. Type of inflammation in Crohn's. Type of inflammation. So in Crohn's, we find non-caseating granuloma. Clear? What? Non-caseating granuloma. Apart from non-caseating granuloma, we discussed that what kind of giant cells are seen. Langerhans giant cells, and there is infiltrate of mononuclear cells. Now see what kind of inflammation is seen in ulcerative colitis. In ulcerative colitis, there is presence of non-specific acute and chronic inflammatory cells. Now see the mucosal changes. What kind of mucosal changes are seen in Crohn's disease? So in Crohn's, there is presence of patchy ulceration. What kind of patchy ulceration in Crohn's? There is patchy ulceration. And we discussed that in ulcerative colitis there is hemorrhagic mucosa with ulceration. So in ulcerative colitis there is hemorrhagic mucosa with ulceration. Now submucosa, we discussed that generally submucosa is widened in Crohn's disease because of edema or presence of lymphoid aggregates. But in ulcerative colitis, submucosa is either normal or the width is reduced. So submucosa in Crohn's disease, it's widened either because of edema or presence of lymphoid aggregates, whereas in ulcerative colitis, it can be normal or reduced in width. Submucosa reduced in width. Another important point that in patients of Crohn's disease, muscularis propria is involved and it is infiltrated by inflammatory cells. So there is presence of inflammatory cells in muscularis propria, whereas muscularis propria is spared. Now one very important point, the conditions in which there is involvement of muscularis propria, in these conditions there is increased incidence of fibrosis and stricture. So here in Crohn's disease, fibrosis is common. Here fibrosis is common, whereas in ulcerative colitis fibrosis is rare. So these are the differences on the basis of microscopic features. Now see what are the complications which are seen in Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. So complications, first and very important, what? Fistula. We discussed that in Crohn's there is increased incidence of both internal as well as external fistula, whereas it's rare in ulcerative colitis. So first, fistula, it's more common in Crohn's disease. And what kind of fistula? We can find both internal as well as external. Clear? But fistula, it's rare in ulcerative colitis. Second complication, stricture. So we discussed that fibrotic strictures are more common in Crohn's disease and it's absent or rare in ulcerative colitis. So fibrotic strictures, it's more common in Crohn's, but it's rare in ulcerative colitis. And one complication which we discussed just now, that's toxic megacolon. And what is the most common predisposing factor? It's the ulcerative colitis. So toxic megacolon is rare in Crohn's disease and it's relatively more common in ulcerative colitis. So toxic megacolon, relatively rare in Crohn's disease, relatively rare, and it's more common, relatively more common in ulcerative colitis. Now see the risk of malignancy. Okay, we discussed previously also. So if you're talking about carcinoma colon, so the risk of carcinoma colon is almost equal in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. If we are going to discuss the small intestinal malignancy, so we discussed that obviously risk is more in Crohn's as compared to ulcerative colitis, and risk of cholangiocarcinoma, so we discussed that this is more common in ulcerative colitis. So here it is more common in ulcerative colitis. After that, one important question which is frequently asked related to Crohn's and ulcerative colitis, and that's in radiology, the named signs. So what are the named signs which are seen in Crohn's and ulcerative colitis? So the named signs in Crohn's, string sign of Cantor. What was the cause? It was because of hosepipe appearance. There is creeping fat, cobblestone appearance, comb sign, raspberry thorn, rose thorn appearance, or fat halo sign. And what is the mnemonic? String has CRF. The mnemonic is string has CRF. What are the named signs in ulcerative colitis? So in ulcerative colitis, there is garden hose appearance, pipe stem colon also known as lead pipe sign, there is stove pipe appearance, and there is presence of collar button ulcers. So how to remember? The mnemonic is GPL stove collar button. So what's the mnemonic? GPL stove collar button. Clear? So these are the differences between Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis, and this is all about inflammatory bowel disease.